Hello, my name's Helen, and I was widowed through suicide at the age of 24. Suicide is a very difficult death to come to terms with. For us, it was very unexpected. There were no signs, there was no warning that that was what my husband was thinking about, and it came as a very unexpected event. And it has a massive effect on everybody around, all friends, colleagues, family, everybody. It has a ripple effect through whole communities. And I returned to work a few months after my husband's death, and it was the act of returning to work that I really began to process what had actually happened, because up until that point I'd kind of created this bubble around me where I didn't interact with the real world, because the real world was just too scary. So returning to work and breaking through that bubble, that was when I actually began to process what had happened. And when you do return to work after a loss like that, maybe a few months after, there is this expectation that you're sort of over it and you're ready to embrace this new life. And for me, that just wasn't the case. I was still coming to terms that it had actually happened. I was still half expecting him to walk through the door, because it was so unbelievable that he'd done it. So for me, returning to work, I felt quite misunderstood. I felt quite alienated. And I think as human beings, we naturally want to try and make people feel better. And so we often use silver linings when we are talking to people who are navigating grief. Things like, well, at least they're not suffering anymore. At least you're young. At least you haven't got children. And for me, those comments were so alienating, because I wasn't ready to feel grateful for the situation that I was in. I was in the depths of despair, and I just felt so alienated. And it's not uncommon when people do return to the workplace. People often don't know what to say. People avoid you, and people, like I said, just really try to make you feel better. And for me, I set up the Flying Fish Company as a way of supporting workplaces to feel more confident in talking about grief, in talking about death, and to have more confidence in talking to people, so that when people do return, they've got the best chances of it working out as possible.
I think a lot of workplaces lack any kind of knowledge or awareness about how to perhaps compassionately support bereaved employees when they're coming back to work. There was a very significant bit of research commissioned in 2013 by the TUC around the impact of people going back to work after a close bereavement. And I think they interviewed about 2,000 or 3,000 people. And this was people returning to work in the previous 5 years after a close bereavement. And 34% said that they had a horrendous time of people saying the wrong thing to them, not saying anything at all, expecting them to be back to normal, which is quite the opposite. And I do think there is a really, really strong need for organizations to be a little bit more supportive, a little bit more understanding of people coming back after a bereavement. There's a number of organisations around, particularly here in the Northeast, that are doing really rather good training, half-day and full-day workshops around a basic overview of bereavement and grief awareness, and in those sessions of half days or full days, a fair amount of good practice and the right language to use. And I really would love to see organisations roll that kind of training out to all of their managers, middle managers, senior managers, occupational health, HR, right up to director level. And I think that if everybody could come on board, it's not a question of, we're not training them to be grief counsellors or grief guides, but it's just giving each one of them a better understanding so that they can actually support and be there for those bereaved employees. What compassionate communities are doing, I think, is absolutely amazing. It's bringing together a community, and this is long overdue.